Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Rachel Patton, Executive Director of Preserve Arkansas. Preserve Arkansas is Arkansas's statewide nonprofit advocate for historic preservation. Welcome to Women in Preservation, the series that features women who are working to save historic places. I'd like to begin by thanking our program sponsor, DMX Architecture of Fayetteville, for their generous support. Many of you are already members of Preserve Arkansas, and we thank you for being a member and for supporting us. If you're not a member, I'd like to encourage you to join us for as little as $50 a year. Your memberships are vital to our organization and allow us to continue the important work of saving Arkansas's historic places. The 10th annual Stone's Throw Brewing Block on Rock Birthday Bash is coming up on Saturday, July 29th in Little Rock's MacArthur Park Historic District. Celebrate a decade of Stone's Throw brewing with live music, food trucks, and of course, plenty of local Stone's Throw beer. A portion of the event proceeds benefits Preserve Arkansas. So you can help us in 3 ways. You can plan to attend the block party, invite your friends, or sign up for a volunteer shift. More information is available on our website at preservearkansas.org, and I hope to see many of you there. Join us next month on August the 8th for a talk by Britton Bostick, Long Range Planning and Special Projects Manager for the City of Fayetteville. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Melissa Roach. Melissa Roach is a native Arkansan and moved to Springdale when she was an infant. She has had a lifelong fascination with history and old places. Melissa holds a BA in history from the College of the Ozarks in Point Lookout, Missouri, and a master's in historic preservation from Clemson University College of Charleston. Her work experience has ranged from working on National Register projects in South Carolina and North Carolina to running 2 National Historic Landmarks in Natchez, Mississippi, to transitioning into the commercial construction world as a project manager and administrator. She loves speaking with young people about her journey in historic preservation and how she has used that knowledge in every aspect of her career. Melissa currently serves as project administrator at Weatherproofing Technologies Incorporated. Welcome, Melissa.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
All right. So my name is Melissa Roach. As Rachel said, I am a native Arkansan. I grew up in Springdale. My family has been there for 30 years now. And I call this presentation Taking the Long Way. I have lived all over the Southeast, and I recently found myself back in Springdale in 2019 by way of South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, and Colorado. And I'm just going to talk to you today a little bit about how I got to where I am now. Maybe. There we go. All right. So my formative years. I grew up in a road trip family. We drove all over the United States, piled up in a Suburban, and we were that family that stopped at all of the historical markers and stopped at historic sites. And from an early age, I just ate it up. I loved learning about these new places that I did not get to see every day. And I love the history or the story of people. And I grew up in a family of master carpenters. So my grandfather was a master carpenter, retired from the University of Illinois. And in my home, we had all of these antiques that were, built by someone in the family as far back as the 1850s, I believe. And I love the stories that went along with these different pieces of furniture and where they came from and where my family came from. And that caused me to dive into books. I was always a voracious reader. And so I would start reading about areas that my family had come from. Um, Here in these photos, you see me in the middle one. You're welcome for the awkward photos today of my childhood. The middle one, we were on a trip to northern Minnesota. We were at Lake Superior. We toured lighthouses and all of these different homesteads and coal mines, and I loved every single minute of it. The other two photos are I went on a trip with my dad again, northern Minnesota, and we helped my aunt build a 20 by 20 cabin on her little homestead when I was about 16 years old. So I was always surrounded by building and um, structures and people that loved family, and they always told stories. And my mom came from a large family. So it was a lot of fun to be able to put all of these things that I saw my dad do every day as a superintendent for Kinco Constructors in Springdale. I got to see those things being put into practice. And I was about 16 when I was like, oh, historic preservation could be a really interesting field of study to go in. At that time, I thought, well, I was thinking of things like document management and archives and museum studies, because that's what I knew it to be. And it was really at this age, around 14 or 15, that I decided, I think this is what I want to do. I want to learn about people and places and things, and how does, the built environment affect all of us, in different ways. And so throughout my teen years, I decided that, I think this is what I want to do. I was able to go to the College of the Ozarks. That is where I have my Bachelor of Arts in History. And I was surrounded by an amazing group of professors that I still call mentors. And there I was able to explore so many different facets of education and what I wanted to do with my life. In the upper right hand corner, you will see a photo that is a house from the Ozarks. Being from this area, I always find the history and the structures incredibly interesting and personal. And in my junior year, as I was deciding between Clemson University and the University of Virginia for architectural history, I was given this great opportunity by an art history professor who liked architecture to do an independent study. And all I did for an entire semester for her was study different types of architecture. And one of those, she required me to do local architecture. And so I studied Ozark vernacular architecture for about 3 weeks. And I was fascinated. I still to this day remember the excitement that I had going into office hours with her and discussing everything that I had learned and seen, and talking about different examples that I knew of personally, in and around my hometown. And then around that same time, I also learned that I was very much interested in the social justice aspect of it, how people relate to the built environment. How does that affect us? How does that affect people? And I became really interested in, especially women's rights at that time. And for my senior seminar, I wrote The Women at Home, which was about labor progression of female British munitions workers during the Great War. My senior seminar was on World War I, and I was lucky enough to have a professor that believed in me and write and allowed me to write a seminar paper on a very unconventional topic that I'm not entirely sure most students ever thought that they would want to write about. And the whole inspiration for that was seeing an old ad in a history book, a marketing ad for jobs, and they were pushing jobs for women during that time. In my junior year, I was able to go on a trip to Western Europe with members of the 101st Airborne who dropped at Normandy during World War II. And that's the photo on the left, me and fellow students with our veteran. And this is the trip that changed the trajectory of what I wanted to do. It was after that trip that I said, yes, I am going to grad school. I am going to pursue an advanced degree in history, specifically historic preservation. Being surrounded by structures from as early as the 9th century to today, and listening to people talk about their hometowns, speak about how generations of their family had lived in a particular home, all of these things lit that fire in me that I was like, okay, I'm going to pursue this, and I think I can do it. And I had very supportive professors and people in my life that believed in me, and they were like, yes, you can, and we're going to help you. And so in my final year, I applied to the University of Virginia for architectural history, and then Clemson University College of Charleston. And I was accepted into both, and I chose to go to Charleston, South Carolina. And it was in Charleston that we really understood the breadth of what was involved in historic preservation, as far as what can be done with it, what all falls under that umbrella. You'll see on the left, me on a roof. We were doing a project for Clemson University in Clemson, South Carolina. They were demolishing 3 craftsman style homes that were faculty housing for a very long time. And so within our group, we documented those homes before they were demolished. We took photos, we did measure drawings of all of them, put together an entire presentation so that the university could save that and document the history of those structures that had been there since the 1920s and 30s. I was up on the roof because everyone else was scared to climb the ladder. So I somehow ended up there. And then we did stuff, the bottom photo, which is a big white blob, but that is actually a paint sample of a house in Charleston that we were working on doing measure drawings, taking paint samples, and really we were adding to their national register nomination. And in that bottom slide, you can kind of see a vein of purple at the bottom center. And this project was super exciting because in a house full of white paint, I take a paint sample and I have my professor look at it, and there's purple in it and gold and teal. And she took a couple of more samples. And what we ended up finding out was that that was actually a trompe-l'oeil feature in that cornice originally. And it had been covered by decades worth of white and cream paint. And so that moment was one of those that you get super excited, even though you've done all of this hard work and I probably looked at 100 paint samples, and I was looking at all of this cream and white and a little bit of tan. And the next thing you know, I get purple. And I know that they recommended to the owner of doing a full reveal at the time, to see if you could uncover any of that original paint detailing. But in that moment, I did not selfishly care about what happened. I was just excited that there was that type of detail in a sample that I took from a drawing room. And then we also participated in a neighborhood survey. This neighborhood is called Burnstown. That's the upper center picture. And we were trying to get this neighborhood on the National Register as a neighborhood nomination. These houses were all built in the 1940s during the boom of the Charleston Navy shipyard. Very interesting architectural features. And so as part of this was a survey where we all had different streets and we took photos and we documented all of the homes and put together an entire survey and submitted that to the National Register. We also did a lot of super hands-on work. You'll see me measuring a ruin of a plantation, and my colleague was writing down the measurements. We were documenting the ruin of an 1820s plantation, which was so diverse and interesting that we got to do all of these different things within a school setting. And they really did a great job of giving us coverage of all of that to really explore our options and decide on what we liked. And this is that same ruin. This is Peachtree Plantation, and it kind of gives a sample of the first project that I was on that we did interpretation as well as document existing conditions. So the upper left-hand corner is the first day that we were on site. This home burnt in the 1850s, I believe, and it is located in the Delta. And so it's heavily mosquitoed, very damp, and there's only, I believe, one photograph in existence of it. And then in the bottom left, you will see a photo of what it looked like after it was stabilized. So my group put together drawings of the ruins, we took photographic evidence, and we presented that to the owner in an effort to be able to stabilize the property. And this was the first project that was really there was value added to it. So this, you got there by a path. Nobody's going there unless you're looking for it. But our evidence was firm enough that the owner did put in the time and the effort and the funds to be able to stabilize it the way it is in the bottom left today. The biggest thing in graduate school that really kind of piqued my interest in a subject that I really love was our historic research class, in which we were assigned property assessments. We had to do house histories, basically. And I was assigned these two homes on this little Rose Lane, a little 2-block street. And we had to delve into property records and newspaper archives and all of these different sources to figure out the story of each of these houses. And this was in a predominantly what started out as an immigrant neighborhood and then later became a prominent African-American neighborhood, but in recent years had suffered decay due to road construction. And in this presentation, my first semester of graduate school, I had this next slide that talked about the effect of that roadway, which was called the Crosstown. And the upper right-hand corner is a photograph from the paper in the 1960s when the roadway went through. But then the bottom photos were photos of houses near that road. Well, 10 years ago, I was about to say today, these homes that are just in various states of decay. Crime was rampant in the neighborhood in the 80s and the 90s. And I was looking at these photos and I realized that everyone talked about this section of road called the Crosstown because it was a major thoroughfare, or is a major thoroughfare in Charleston. However, I couldn't find any documentation or scholarly research that had actually studied the roadway, the houses that were on it, what was lost, etc. So while doing the house histories from my Rose Lane houses, I became good friends with the archivist at one of the historic societies in Charleston. And at the end of my first year, I get an email from her that asked me to give her a call. And I was so excited, and I was like, oh, what does Karen have for me? Well, lo and behold, she had been given by the state of South Carolina, they were given right-of-way photos from when the crosstown and the interstate interchanges were put in. So these are all photos from the early 1950s from surveyors that had just been sitting at the state archive. And she was like, I really think that if you haven't thought of a thesis topic yet, I really think this could give you some great evidence as to, evidence and backup for your thesis and things for you to look at. And I was stoked. I went there the next day. I got a disc of all the photos, and the Crosstown project was born. Now, the Crosstown is the stretch of yellow on the map on the left. It goes from the Ashley River there on the far left. And then my project stopped right at the orange by the number 17. That's where I-26 officially starts. So I studied approximately 1.5 miles worth of the road. And what I found out after that summer, here's some more photos. What I found out after that summer is that a local professor who is a huge history buff, and also very OCD, he had taken all of the Charleston DOT photos. He compared them to old maps, and then he had categorized all of the photographs by address. So by the time my first summer was over and I was working on this project, I already had a probable listing of every single location of every single structure I had a photo of, approximately 2,000 photos. And then my job became a lot easier because then I just had to verify information. So when I look at these photographs, you see a mixture of commercial properties, you see houses that are in relatively good condition, you see homes that are in not good condition, you see families in them, children in them, you see the gentlemen, the surveyors holding their arms out, showing where the right-of-way is going in conjunction with the property. And I was drawn to the people just in these photos, and I was like, there's such a wide variety of this roadway. How did this impact the neighborhood? And I started to ask those questions, because the main complaint was that this road split up neighborhoods and that it dissected a historically working class neighborhood. Neighbors could no longer get across a 4-lane highway with a median. How did that impact the growth of the area, and how did it impact the people that were there? And those became the fundamental questions that I tried to answer in my thesis. At the time, with the help of my advisors, I basically put together an architectural design index in which I rated all of the structures within the right of way, by certain criteria, whether they were in excellent, fair, or good condition or poor, with my main goal asking, how did this impact the neighborhood? What historic fabric was taken? And through that, you see so many houses, especially like in the upper right, that are in excellent condition. That house was demolished. The house to the left of it actually still stands because the right of way was just wide enough. They did not take any other houses. There are some, like that house in the upper right hand photo. The house off to the left actually sits maybe 10 feet from it's maybe 10 feet away from the highway now. But the best part of this project was that I was able to get out. I lived in the neighborhood just to the south, so I walked this neighborhood all the time. I was able to speak with people. I talked to folks, folks that remembered the highway going in. I was able to pour through 2 decades worth of city minutes and DOT meeting minutes. Because one of the big complaints is that the highway was racially motivated. And so I was able to investigate, is that true? Was it racially motivated? All of these interesting questions that I had never really thought about before. And then it threw me into this headlong research rabbit hole of highways and right-of-ways and how that affected not just Charleston, South Carolina, but has affected pretty much every major city in the United States. And it was one of those topics that just keeps giving. It's still something that I'm incredibly passionate about, and I still read about. And I got a lot of joy out of a very difficult project. And then at the end, what you see here is a map, kind of the process of what I did. I took old Sanborn maps, which were the fire maps, and I stitched them together and traced all of the buildings within that vicinity. And I categorized each building based on its condition. And it ended up looking something like this. All of the buildings that are colored in were lost to the highway. Some of the other, I just lost my train of thought. But what I concluded was that this highway was not racially motivated. They were literally just trying to connect point A with point B. But that at the same time, most of the structures that were taken were in fair condition. There were some exceptional ones that were torn down, but most of them were not in excellent condition, but they weren't in super poor condition either. And so it was interesting to see this because they've used my thesis and the base of my research in other studies in the city of Charleston to discuss the crosstown. And since in the last 10 years, discuss beautification, better access to connect the neighborhoods, all of these different things. And so my thesis became one of those projects that I hit my goal, and I was able to tie my love for buildings, but also talk about people at the same time, because I think the two are interconnected, and that's the part of history that I love the most. And I was able to, take this thesis, and it was something that I was incredibly proud of and happy that I was able to complete and work with the people that I did. And then straight out of grad school, I got my dream job in Natchez, Mississippi. I was the assistant director and manager of the properties Longwood and Stanton Hall. Longwood you might recognize because I believe it's the largest unfinished octagonal house in the United States. It's also known as Longwood's Folly. It was not finished because of the onset of the Civil War. So only the ground level and the first floor are completed. And my office was kind of in the back part of that. And then Stanton Hall was built in the 1820s. Beautiful house museum. While I was there, I was in charge of personnel as well as general maintenance and upkeep. And I really loved, once again, my love for people and buildings were combined because I love being able to interact with my staff each and every day, but I was also very hands-on in the upkeep of the house and what needs to be done long-term. And we also hosted programs and different types of tours and everything. And I love being a part of those. Here you will see the unfinished portions of Longwood Hall, the center portion. So in the photo on the left, that's the upper level of the tower, which was surprisingly still stable. Staff was allowed to go up there. Folks who were just on a tour were not allowed past the first floor. But we were able to do some stabilization while I was there. After a long time of it being exposed to the elements, there was a little bit of termite damage and things that we had to fix here and there. And then the photo to the right was standing in the center on the first floor and looking all the way up. So as you can see, it would have been, it's a spectacular house as is, but it would have been really impressive had they been able to finish it. And then Stanton Hall, these are photos that I stole off of the internet because I can't find any of mine, but our biggest challenge in this house was we had huge water leaks. They had the interior gutter systems in this house and they were failing, and on tight budgets and a whole host of other issues, we were trying to figure out how to mitigate, major water damage, especially to those beautiful cornices and everything, without ripping out entire walls. And that was the biggest challenge while I was there. We hosted a lot of tours. Part of my job was filling in for sick staff. So I gave, many a house tour, and I enjoyed meeting people from all over the place. But then some life happened and I could no longer stay in Mississippi. And so I moved back to Charleston. And that is the point when I pivoted to general contracting. It was one of those interesting situations where I was like, well, I need a job. And I was back in Charleston, but the historic preservation market is saturated there. And so I was like, well, the next best thing is building. My dad had worked for a general contractor my whole life. I was like, I know I can do this stuff. And so I went to work there for a roofing company. Here in this photo on the left, you'll see the smallest project that I've ever done. It was approximately 16 feet by 16 feet. It was the renovation and installation of a neonatal resuscitation room at St. Joseph Hospital in Tampa, Florida. That is the smallest project I've ever done. It was only that room. We had a very strict, timeline and schedule. And it was really fascinating to see the bits and pieces that go into building and remodels of today. And then on the right, you will see the largest project I have ever taken part of. That is the Wilson Science Center at the University of the Ozarks in Clarksville. This project was done when I came back to Arkansas, and I was hired on at Kinco Constructors here in Springdale. They hired me on as a project coordinator because that was the bulk of my background. And then at the end of the Wilson Science Center, it's approximately a $20 million project. We renovated a building. We gave them a new addition. I was promoted to project manager. And so it was one of those weird things where some people might think that it's not considered historic preservation. But for me, I take pride in seeing buildings of today being built and knowing that I take a part in the future. That's kind of how I view it, anyways. But while at Kinco, I was able to do a lot of historic preservation projects, which I loved. I kind of got to advise on them. And one of them was Cane Hill Presbyterian Church. I was a part of this project team in 2019 and 2020. We did a renovation of the interior. We put a new steeple on. They did some tuck pointing. They got a new roof. It was just one of those fun projects where I got to use a lot of my knowledge from my past in my present setting. And so there's the church from the front, and then you can see that the day that they put the new steeple on. I loved being a part of that. And then you can see kind of an in progress photo. We had taken up the floors, expanded the crawl space, and then the finished product there. I was able to work with John Greer and Mason Ellis with WE Architects on this one, and they were just wonderful to work with. And it was so much fun to be able to talk to them and bounce preservation ideas off of them and talk about things as, down to historically accurate carpet, all of that stuff made work so much more fun. And then I also have worked on a few others. So the other major project that I helped was the renovation of Alpha Delta Pi on the U of A campus. We added on to an existing building and then renovated the 1930s structure. And you can see it here today. This presented a whole host of challenges that was interesting to think about from a preservation standpoint, but also, a modern engineering standpoint and up to codes. It's just one of those projects that ends up sticking with you. And, it's so much fun to see diversity in, the different projects that you have, and being able to insert, my formal knowledge wherever I can, because I don't always get to do that. I kind of diverted from historic preservation to general contracting. I've been able over the course of the years to be able to do some consulting on the side and be able to help folks, if they buy an old house, and kind of talk about the history and talk about the time period and what would be historically appropriate, and where can we find similar doorknobs to what you would have originally, or all of that type of stuff. And so this was brief, but this is kind of my journey of where I'm at. I don't, unfortunately, in my current job, get to use my preservation knowledge that often, but that's what volunteering's for. And if I pick up a consulting project, then that keeps me happy. It's where my practical meets my passion. And it's just been a wild ride of a 10-year career for me, but it's been fun and it's been a learning experience. And on that, I am done. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Melissa.
I kind of ran through that. Sorry, y'all.
No, you're fine. So if you're watching, we have plenty of time for questions. You can put them in the chat or in the Q&A, either one. And as we give some folks a chance to do that, I've got several questions.
Okay. Yes.
I wrote more questions while you were talking.
I like questions.
Okay, so just a comment, but if you haven't looked at it, oh, somebody's already got something in the chat. Oh, compliment, really inspiring, thank you. If you haven't studied it before, then I would encourage you to read some about Little Rock and our history in Central Arkansas with interstate construction, with I-30 and I-630. I don't know if you've looked at that, but there's
A little bit.
It's similar story to your thesis project. Okay.
Fortunately, it's the story of a lot of highways going through neighborhoods.
Yes, absolutely.
All over the country.
Okay, question for you. What would you recommend to someone who is interested in getting into the preservation field, more technical or more hands-on?
So I would definitely do your research on programs. If you're looking for advanced degrees, I know that there are a couple of programs. College of Charleston has a bachelor's in historic preservation that kind of gives you a wide background. I know there's a couple more, they're mainly in the Northeast. But if you want higher education in that, I highly recommend just doing your research on the programs, and don't just limit yourself to historic preservation as kind of your subject or tagline. University of Pennsylvania has if you want to go into materials conservation, excellent program if you want to look into that. University of Virginia's program was more architectural history based. So that was ultimately why I went to Clemson. They're as of this year, it's just Clemson University. So no more College of Charleston, even though they're in Charleston. But Columbia has an excellent historic preservation program that focuses a lot on materials and things like that. I would really just do your research and ask people that you know in the preservation field if they know of anyone at those places, because the preservation world is small and you would be shocked at who knows who or has a connection somewhere.
That's true. Do you think people who would come out with an education in a historic trade, would they be more likely to be a more marketable job candidate?
100%. I just had this conversation with a young guy who's like 19 the other day. He's really interested in woodworking and stuff like that. And I was like, you really need to find someone, whether it's Bill Smith down in Royal that does, fixes old windows and builds new windows and doors. I was like, it's a dying art. So I'm like, you can contact, I have a colleague that runs a historic window shop in Rhode Island. And she's one of those people that will tell me, she says, if you know of anyone that wants to get into the actual trade portion, please call me. And I have contacts all over the United States, and we will find, as long as you're willing to move somewhere, reasonably, I think that would be awesome. And that's something that you don't see that often anymore, especially in the hands-on, version. Charleston actually does have American College of the Building Arts. They're located there, and that's an excellent school. I mean, they do timber working and iron work and, specifically like more historic iron work. And I know there's other programs. They were kind of their first of their kind coming out about 12 years ago, but there's other ones popping up, especially on the East Coast, that would be awesome to see more people get into.
Yes, we would love to have a program here in Arkansas. We need the craftspeople.
Oh, yes. I mean, in grad school, they let us run cornice and stuff just for fun to show us how to do it. And I was like, it's a lot of work, but it's not something that people know how to do anymore, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
It's sad.
Okay, another question. I was curious how you've noticed roofing changing over time, especially in terms of flashing.
Yeah, so I think flashing, I have now been in roofing for 10 years. That's specifically what I actually transitioned into originally. I think what we're seeing in regards to flashing on historic structures is better understanding of quality versus quickness. Before anybody that's been on our old roof, you see tar slapped on brick, and then they put this, that's what they use to seal the flashing. I think you've got more products coming out that are more conducive to long-term use, that are also sensitive to historic materials. They're more sensitive to historic materials in a good way. They're easier to work with. They're still quality products. I think, at least in my time with the companies that I've been with, the training is better, because all of the companies that I've worked with to some degree do repairs on historic structures. And I think too, in the last 10 years, you've seen a lot of owners that want, especially if you're doing a restoration, they want to use the good materials. So they're not as willing, if you need copper flashing, they don't want the alternative. They want copper flashing, and they're willing to pay the money for that copper flashing. So it's been really a different attitude change and it starts with the owners, because at the end of the day, the owner is the one paying for it. But if they're willing to pay for the time and the quality and the craftsmanship, like I'm seeing the trend where that happens, the quality is happening way more than, just a quick fix, that when you go up on an old roof, you don't go, oh my gosh, what's happened here for the last 50 years? There's been several of those. I hope that answers the question. If it doesn't, ask me again.
Okay. Okay. Do you know anyone, well, in Northwest Arkansas specifically, I believe this question is directed, who restores plaster?
No, because the times that I have done plaster restoration, it has been Oaks Brothers out of Greenbrier that comes up and they do it. So they have been the ones that I have used on any Arkansas project. If it has plaster restoration, Oaks Brothers, they travel all over the state. So I don't know of anyone local.
Okay, thank you. And Paula, I do know, I don't know what the name of the group is, but we could find out. There was a crew that did some good plaster work in Fort Smith, and I think they were local to Fort Smith a few years ago on a project that we gave an award to.
Yeah.
So.
And that's the thing, like I know that there's other ones out there, but I don't have any personal experience with them.
Okay, now I have some other questions about Natchez.
Okay.
Why did somebody else not come along and finish out Longwood?
Because they were so poor. So that area hit a very hard depression after the Civil War, which of course all of the South was pretty much in a depression, but Natchez was hit particularly hard. The family, all of the craftsmen came from the North. So they all came from Philadelphia, Boston. The minute the war broke out, they leave. Well, then because of the civil unrest that was going on, you couldn't get people to come back down there, and there was no money. Mr. Longwood died, I think, in 1864. So he died during the war, and his wife packed up and moved her kids back north. And so it just sat there for the longest time. And it's shocking, that house, for as long as it sat empty, because it sat empty for, I want to say 30 years. And then someone bought it, and they just lived in the finished first story, which is pretty spacious. I mean, it's 1,500, 1,600 square feet, just the first floor. And that's all they ever did. I mean, upstairs still has old tools in it, like pieces of wood, lath. Like they literally dropped everything and walked off. And it wasn't ever touched.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and
Okay.
Something I failed to mention is that they have the enslaved quarters were right behind the house, and that was actually finished. And so that's actually where my office was. But the family kicked out their slaves and made them live in pens. And then, so the family never even lived in the house, was long story short. Like they finished the dependency first so that the enslaved folk would have somewhere to live. And then they never even got to live there. And
Wow.
yeah. And it was something else. But that's where my office was.
I'm sure it was an interesting experience working those jobs. And that was another question I was going to ask was, I've never toured either one of those houses. So on the tour, did they talk about slavery?
No.
Okay. I toured another home in Natchez whenever I visited, and they did talk about it, but it was not the best, I didn't think, interpretation.
Right. And I think that, so my boss was the director, and she's actually now the curator at the Shelburne Museum in Vermont. But she was actually rewriting our script and our programs to present a clearer and more accurate version of the history without so much being left out. And that, her and I were working on that together, and unfortunately that met a lot of pushback. Natchez is not very big. You've been there. I mean, when I lived there 11 years ago, it was, I want to say 20,000 people. But that didn't get talked about. Slavery didn't get talked about, which is sad because that's how those houses were run. Like those folks were the backbones of those houses. But yeah, it was not a thing. And I left before Katie finished her new scripts that, we were working on. So I don't know. I never got to see the final script and see how she was actually able to incorporate a more accurate, fuller interpretation of the houses, unfortunately. But they are gorgeous, that is for sure.
Yes, they are. Let's see. Oh, Patricia added a note for those in the chat for Plaster in Central Arkansas. Eric Fippen has worked on Charles Thompson properties and travels all over the state as well. Thank you. Okay, then I will, if there's not any other questions, I'll ask one final thing. Let's see. Do you have a favorite historic site that you like to visit in Arkansas or just anywhere?
Oh man, that's hard.
Okay, Arkansas.
Okay, Arkansas. Let me think. So I love going to Devil's Den. My family were big backpackers, hikers. I came to realize as an adult it's because we were poor and that was free. But I love going to Devil's Den. I had family members that were part of the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. And so I love seeing all that work that was done, in the 1930s. As far as like really old sites, there is this one house that is in between Springdale and Huntsville. It's on Old 412, and it was dilapidated when I was a kid. I mean, 4 or 5. And now it's almost falling down. But that is like my most sentimental spot, that when I drive anywhere, east, you can still kind of see it from where the new highway curves, but you just look at that house and you go, oh, that's so sad. I want to know who lived there and what they did and how is this important to the local history, because in 30 years I don't think it's ever been inhabited. Maybe I should add that to my project list to find out the address and do a little digging. But no, I think Devil's Den is probably my favorite place to go. My favorite historic site ever, though, was a 10th century church in Normandy.
Mm-hmm.
That was, to see the craftsmanship in that, and you know that you've been standing there and people have stood there for 1,000 years. That's like an outer body experience at that point. It's so cool. But I if there's a story behind it, I will go and see anything. I don't think I mentioned this, but like my grandparents had a little historical marker at the end of their road because it was the site of some like lost Swedish wagon train. My grandparents lived in southern Minnesota. So it's like, and we'd go run down there and read it. Like we'd read it 5 times, a summer, but I love all of that stuff. If there's a story and there's people, and I mean, I'm there. I'm down to look at anything.
That's why I like it too, the stories. And I know the house you're talking about on
You know the
412.
house I'm talking about?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like just past Hinesville. It's like
Yeah.
right after the 45 cutoff. I love that house. I've been in love with that house since I was little, but it's pretty far gone now, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is. It is. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Melissa. I enjoyed your program and we appreciate you speaking this month. And we hope to see everybody next month.
Thank you very much. I appreciate y'all having me.
You're welcome. Bye.